Educational Insights, a Superintendent's Podcast. Hosted by Brooke Olsen-Farrell. Episode number 7, FY25 Budget Revote Discussion.
Hi there, Slate Valley. I'm Brooke Olsen-Farrell, Superintendent of Schools, and I'm here today with Patricia Beaumont, the School Board Chair for Slate Valley, and Glen Cousineau, the Finance Chair for Slate Valley. And we're here today to discuss our school budget and our school budget revote. On March 5th, our budget failed by a margin of 464 votes, and we are in the process of putting out a revote, which is now scheduled for April 11th. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what that means and what is in this new budget. So thank you, Glen and Patty, for joining me today. So this question is really for both of you. Either of you can answer. What do you think the biggest reason is that our budget failed?
Oh, that's a great question. I have to say, I think it failed on misinformation that's out in our public right now. I do think that our school sends lots of information out to people. Sometimes it can be a little bit overbearing to have too much information. I know that in any field, but I'm wondering if people really read what we send them or look at the podcasts that we do or really digest that information. Because with a budget that truly, with all that we're going to talk about in a minute and all the things we put forward, our budget is not significantly higher than it was last year. In fact, it's not at all higher than it was last year. So it's very disconcerting when you think that our budget can't pass when the board has put forward their best faith effort to be able to have a budget that we feel is as reasonable as possible.
Glen, do you want to add to that?
I would agree with what Patty has said. There was a lot of rhetoric that was in mainstream media about huge property tax increases for the entire state. 25-30% were numbers that were being thrown out. I think that has really scared a lot of people, and rightfully so. Taxes in the state of Vermont are way out of hand. The whole notion, I think, of funding education off of property taxes is something that the legislature really needs to re-examine. So with everything that was in mainstream media, it had people really concerned. I think that this is an area that's as evident by our new student numbers, when we're the 5th lowest in the state for poverty, or 5th highest for student poverty. People are struggling. And when they see or hear these numbers without fully understanding everything, it leads to panic, and it leads to people just voting no. This district has always wanted, 2 years ago, our overall budget was a decrease, and it still was voted down. I don't know what the answer really is. We try to educate the voters, but we're also trying to educate our children. And their future is what we do now. We need to set our kids up so that they can succeed no matter what they choose to do, and that they can contribute to society instead of being a drain on society.
So last night at our board meeting, the board approved another budget to put out for vote. I know there was a lot of conversation about what to put out to voters. Can either of you explain the cuts that were made and the rationale for those cuts?
Sure. We cut $150,000 from the budget, and that consisted of 3 instructional assistants. The reason that we put that forward is because those students have left the district as of next year. When we put a budget together, we actually started the budget process far earlier than when we're voting on a budget. And so at that point in time, we thought we would need those individuals, but we found out we don't for next year. And we also cut by another 30,000,
Yep.
thank you, for our elementary school late bus. We were thinking that we would need that bus to support one of our after-school programs, but that program has been changed and it's going to be during our school day, so we don't need that bus.
So what is the number that folks will see on the ballot come April 11th?
The number is now $30,871,635.
And that's the cost for providing education in how many schools in Slate Valley?
We have 5 schools in our.
So that's for all 5 schools? Because we don't delineate by town.
Correct.
Can you explain what happens if there's a second budget failure?
You know, the cuts that we made for this revote were cuts that for things that we did not need. Further cuts are going to involve things that will directly impact our students. You know, we've talked about reducing or not filling a nursing position, which may mean that schools may not be fully covered with a full-time nurse. We've talked about decreasing the bus monitor, who is an adult that is there because to try to alleviate some behavioral issues that happen on our school buses. If that person's not there, it may have a negative impact on the safety of some of our children. There are other cuts that to be looked at. We looked at basically reducing a position that would allow students to explore career options. So if we have to vote the budget for a third time, cuts that are made will have a direct impact on students, on what we can offer. And those cuts will have to be looked at because any cuts from here on out need to be done equitably. They need to come from all of the buildings, and they need to come from across the board and involve everything. Until we can get to a budget that the voters, the taxpayers will support.
I just wanted to add, if I can, that what ends up happening is if we don't have a budget, and as Glenn just said, we will continue to offer budgets and hope that they pass. However, if we don't have a budget by July 1st, obviously we need to borrow money to be able to pay our financial obligations. I mean, every household needs to pay their financial obligations. We too, as a school district, have those payments that must be made. So the way the law reads is that we can borrow up to 87% of our last passed budget, which in this case would be $24,409,068. This means that we actually would have a shortfall of 21% of the cost of being able to pay our bills. I know that.
Not to mention, we're going to be paying interest on that amount.
Correct, thank you, yes, and pay interest on that amount. So I'm sure that that you can wrap your head around the fact that it would be very difficult to maintain your own household, for example, if your income was reduced by 21%. So, and the other thing is that every time we bring the budget forward to people to vote, we pay approximately $20,000. So that's $20,000 that we're paying on something that we all wish we didn't have to do, and we could be using that money to help educate our children.
And so, isn't it true that employment contracts have to be issued by April 1st? So, for any of our existing employees, we really don't have a mechanism to reduce those jobs that would be just open positions we have throughout the district that we haven't hired for. And if for some reason we didn't issue those contracts by April 1st, we could have been legally liable for the financial impacts of those. So we really don't have a lot of wiggle room.
That is correct. And we have a lot of difficulty, like all schools now, finding licensed, qualified educators. That's a very difficult thing to do in the year 2024. Years ago, it used to be that we had multiple applicants for our jobs, but that is not true anymore. Unfortunately, young people truly don't want to go into education. And so by reducing people and having empty spaces, it does us no good, because then if we try to hire after that, trying to find qualified individuals is difficult enough. So it's not a good way legally, and it's not a good way morally to staff your school.
And I know deferred maintenance in the district has been a huge concern. We're talking about $18 million in deferred maintenance projects across the district. And so we do have some money in the budget to address some of those issues. I mean, the amount pales in comparison to what we actually need, but we've gone decades with deferring maintenance to buy down the tax rate, and we're at the point where we just can't continue to do that. But the longer we go without a budget, it makes some of those maintenance projects unable to occur, because most of them have to occur over the summer months, and to line up contractors makes it challenging. So what is the impact on that? Is there any further impact that I haven't already mentioned on that?
I think that when it comes to the maintenance issues, that's one thing that the taxpayers have been very vocal about over the last couple of years, is the fact that we have not been taking care of our buildings. And at numerous times when we've had listening sessions with taxpayers present, they've always wanted us to increase the amounts in our maintenance budget so that we can take care of our buildings, because for so many years, as you said, we've kicked the can down the road. And we're at a state now where we have identified $18 million worth of basically maintenance issues that need to be addressed. The longer we take to address any of these issues, the more expensive it's going to be. Costs keep going up all the time. And to your point, Brooke, I know several home builders that are telling me they're booked out 2 to 3 years in advance right now. So the fact that we have to schedule stuff in a very tight window, most people in the construction field are turning down jobs because they don't have enough staff to complete jobs. So when you then force them into a very tight window, they just choose, they're either not going to do the job, or when they bid the job, they bid them very high because they know that it's going to cost them more to find people to get those jobs done during that tight time frame. So by waiting longer, it's just going to drive the costs up. And that 18 million, before you know it, it's going to be at 23, 24 million to do the same work. So by cutting the maintenance budget again, I think it just hurts us in the long run.
But the longer we go on without a passed budget, you're by default cutting
Yes.
that budget essentially. So another thing, I think it might be important to address is the fact that since our merger, we have reduced 28 positions in the district as we've realized efficiencies throughout the system. Act 46, despite the rhetoric out there, was a cost savings mechanism for this district. If you look back at our FY16-17 report that was commissioned for Act 46, you would see that the expected tax rate in Slate Valley for FY23 was supposed to be $2.08. We're proposing a tax rate of $1.15 right now. So certainly over time, we have saved money as a result of Act 46. We've closed a school, so we definitely have realized efficiencies throughout the system. And I know one of the things that we hear about is class size. And so can you talk a little bit about why we can't reduce class size anymore in our current configuration?
Sure. So the state of Vermont puts out a document, Educational Quality Standards, and that document addresses the fact that a school district needs to determine what the maximum and minimum numbers of students should be in a classroom. And obviously I'm going to talk about maximums because that's what we're most concerned about in small schools. We have rural schools. We are a small state with a lot of big rural populations, or big rural areas with small populations is what I should say. And unfortunately, we have a number of our grades that have small numbers. In some of our schools, we have numbers as small as 6 for one grade, 6 students to be educated in one grade. When you think about that number, how could you possibly mix multiple grades on either side of it to come up with 20 students? Trying to educate children in a multi-age configuration has been found to be ineffective.
Yeah, we have
a
couple multi-age classrooms because we're aware of
and we do, but we attempt to
correct.
keep, 6 is very small, so that's the smallest one. But the other ones that might be closer to 12 or something like that are small enough that obviously they're 8 away from the maximum that our district has determined. But the other one to consider is, what if you have, let's say, 45 students? So with 45 students, if the maximum is 20, obviously you end up having to divide 45 by 3 as opposed to 2 teachers. So when you look at the average in total, that's why we end up with a ratio of 16 to 1, 16 students to 1 teacher in our district. That's an average throughout the whole pre-K to 12 system. But that's how that's configured, and there's no other way to put those numbers together.
So in those staff cuts, they were across the board: administration, teaching staff, support staff. There really was virtually no department that was untouched by those staff cuts over the last several years. So everyone has lost positions due to right sizing in terms of our enrollment and our configuration.
And how many administrators? I know that was a question that people
We've cut 2 administrators since the merger.
Thank you.
Yep. And actually, according to the state guidelines, we're a little understaffed now in administration in terms of the principal to teacher ratio. We're slightly understaffed. So what is the main message you want to tell our listeners concerning our newest budget proposal?
I guess as far as I'm concerned, the main message is that we don't have the power to make the changes that are necessary at our level. Those changes, our educational funding formula in the state of Vermont does not work. I believe that Act 127 was created to try to create some equity within our school systems, and that even has not worked, as we're seeing right now. The budget has been increased by $3 million without affecting our tax rate. Act 127, the whole idea was that we were going to be able to reinvest monies into our students and not reduce our tax rate. And now we're in this state
because according to the new formula, our students cost more to educate. We have about 40% of them on some type of plan, either special education, 504 for health reasons, or educational support team plans. And we have a high rate of poverty in the district, as Glenn pointed out. So the idea is our kids need more resources.
And so the state has realized that, and so the state has created this act to try to help allocate more money to our district. And yet what's going to happen is if we continue to try to reduce the budget, we won't be able to utilize those funds. So those funds actually end up going back to Montpelier, where they're redistributed to other school districts. So we lose out on that $3 million.
I think that one of the things that is critical to understanding this whole educational funding piece is that Vermont Constitution is one of the few, if not maybe the only one, that states that the people of the state shall educate the children of the state. It's not that the people of Slate Valley will educate the children of Slate Valley. So if there are no children in Slate Valley, the taxpayers of Slate Valley are going to help educate the children of the rest of the state. And that's fundamental. And then since then, the state Supreme Court has ruled that education has to be equitable. It means that the children at every school should be afforded the same educational opportunities. We are far from that in the state. And the longer this whole budget process goes on, and we have to keep shrinking our budget so that our children are not afforded the same opportunities as other students, it just keeps making that division wider instead of narrowing it. I don't know. I mean, I really think that at some point the state will step in, and we will not be voting on school budgets at the local level any longer. We're spending state dollars at the local level, and they won't let that go on a whole lot longer. But in the meantime, while we're doing it, we need to have our students' best interest as we go forward.
So I would hope that part of what people are hearing is that they need to contact their representatives. We are going to put a publication out soon that will have information about who your legislators are in case you don't know and how to get in touch with them. But I think that our local people have to understand that our hands are really tied on this, and it's up to them to talk to people in Montpelier.
Well, thank you, Glenn and Patty, for joining me today. And until next time, Slate Valley.
For more information, visit our website at slatevalleyunified.org/page/budget. Slate Valley Unified Union School District, March 19, 2024.